What if a man could hold the full weight of his own future in his hands before a single thread of it had been woven? What if the king who laughed too loudly, who drank too deeply, who rode toward a boar in a wine-soaked haze and never rode back? What if that king woke one morning before his own coronation, with every last memory of how it all collapsed, burning behind his eyes like a brand pressed to iron? Robert Baratheon opens his eyes in the gray hour before dawn, and he remembers everything. He does not move. He lies still in the darkness of the room they have given him in the Red Keep, and he catalogues what has been returned to him, the way a general catalogues his dead after a lost campaign. Methodically, without flinching, without the mercy of denial. He remembers the boar. He remembers the wine. He remembers the sick, slow stupor that was not illness but murder, served in a goblet by hands that smiled while they poured. He remembers Joffrey's face on the throne, that narrow, petulant face with nothing of Lyanna in it, nothing of the Stormlands, nothing of any blood Robert had ever recognized as his own. He remembers Ned's head on the steps of the Sept of Baelor. He lies there and breathes through it, and when he is finished breathing through it, he rises. The throne room is empty at this hour. The Iron Throne sits in the dim blue light of earliest morning, like a thing that has been waiting, patient as stone, patient as cruelty. Robert Baratheon stands before it and does not sit. He has sat in it. He remembers what it costs, what it carves out of a man, the slow hollowing of every year that follows. He stands before it instead, and he begins to think. Cersei Lannister. He turns the name over in his mind, the way a man turns a blade to check its edge. He sees the whole architecture of it now with a clarity that is almost unbearable. The arrangement, the deception, the quiet systematic dismantling of everything he had built and everything he had failed to protect. Littlefinger. That name lands differently, with a particular cold weight, because Littlefinger is the kind of danger that wears the face of usefulness. A man who profits from chaos does not merely weather it, he cultivates it. Robert had not understood that in the life now behind him. He understands it completely now. He stands in the gray silence, and he makes a vow. Not the kind that is spoken aloud with witnesses and candlelight and the pomp of ceremony. The other kind. The kind that lives in the bones, that does not require language because it has moved beyond language into pure certainty. None of it will unfold. Not the poisoned wine, not the bastards on the throne, not Ned Stark's head on the steps of anything. He will not permit a single stone of that future to be laid. He is the king now. He is the king who remembers, and there is no armor in the world more absolute than foreknowledge worn in silence. He thinks through every name with the systematic patience of a man who has been given an extraordinary gift and intends to use it without waste. He is still Robert. He does not pretend otherwise, does not romanticize himself into something refined and calculating by nature. He knows what he is, a hammer, a man built for collision. But a hammer that knows precisely where to fall is not a blunt instrument. It is a precision tool. The Lannisters will look at him and see what they have always seen. The loud, gregarious king who loves his wine and his wars and his uncomplicated pleasures. They will not see the catalog behind his eyes. They will not see the names. He does not need them to see it. He needs only one man to understand. He crosses to the small writing table near the high window, and he finds parchment and ink in the gray morning light, and he writes without hesitation. because he has already decided this before he sat down, before he rose, before the dawn. He writes 6 words only. He reads them once. He does not write more because more would be explanation, and explanation would be a kind of weakness, and Ned Stark has never needed more than 6 words from Robert Baratheon to know the weight of what is being asked. He seals the letter. He carries it himself to the rookery before the servants are moving, before the keep has fully woken into the noise and ceremony of the day that will crown him. He places it in the hands of a raven keeper who will not remember him being there, and he watches the bird lifted into the pale sky and sent north toward Winterfell, toward the only man alive he trusts with his life. Come to King's Landing. Bring your sword. The raven climbs until it is a black point against the lightning gray, and then it is gone entirely, and the coronation bells will begin to ring within the hour, and Robert Baratheon stands alone at the height of the Red Keep, watching the north and waiting, with 17 years of consequence folded behind his eyes like a map of a country he intends never to visit again. Somewhere below, the city is beginning to stir. The raven is gone, and the bells are ringing, and Robert Baratheon descends from the height of the Red Keep with the particular stillness of a man who has already decided everything that matters. He moves through the coronation as a king should move, with the weight of ceremony, the broad shoulders squared, the voice when it is required booming with that old Baratheon thunder that the court remembers and fears and loves in equal measure. He takes the crown, he speaks the words, he sits the throne, and none of it, not a single moment of the pageantry, touches him at the depth where the real thinking lives. That depth is elsewhere. That depth is already working. A moon's turn is what it takes. 30 days of court and feast, and the grinding machinery of royal governance before the sound he has been waiting for reaches the gates of King's Landing. The sound of northern horses, tired from hard riding, and the voice of a lord who does not waste words asking for entry. Ned arrives in the late afternoon, gray-cloaked and road-worn, and Robert meets him not in the throne room, not in any chamber where ears might find purchase in the walls. He meets him in a room with one door, one window overlooking the sea, and a key that Robert himself turns in the lock before he speaks a single word. What Ned's face does in the first minutes is something that will never be seen by any court painter, any septon, any chronicler of the age. It is a private thing, a face cycling through its entire range, the disbelief that comes first, the particular tightening around the eyes that means Ned Stark is hearing something his honor wants to reject, and then the cold settling, the slow ice that moves through a man when he understands that what he is hearing is not madness, but truth. Robert watches it happen. He has rehearsed this conversation 10,000 times in the dark behind his eyes. And still there is something that moves him about watching Ned arrive at the truth, the same way Ned always arrives at difficult things. Not fast, not with fury, but with the terrible patience of a man who will carry it fully once he picks it up. The incest is the word that does it. Robert says it plainly, without flourish, the way one states a fact of weather or topography. He does not say alleged. He does not say perhaps. He says what he knows because in another life, he read the letter Stannis wrote, heard the confession wrung from a dying man, watched the pale faces of children who looked nothing like him assembled at the foot of his throne like a question no one dared to ask. Ned goes still in the way that stone goes still. Then the fury comes. not loud, never loud with Ned, but righteous and cold as northern iron, and Robert recognizes it and is grateful for it, because it means he is not alone in this, and being not alone is the thing he needed most before he could begin. What follows is not rage. What follows is architecture. Robert has always been a hammer, this is true. This is the story the realm tells about him. But hammers in the hands of thinking men are not crude instruments. They are precise ones. And Robert Baratheon in this life has had 17 years of ghost memory to learn the difference between striking first and striking correctly. He knows what he lost in the life before. He lost it to haste, to wine, to the fundamental mistake of a man who believed the throne made him untouchable. He will not repeat the error. The blow, when it falls, will fall once. It will not need to fall twice. If you're enjoying this alternate history of Westeros so far, please consider subscribing because I upload new stories every single day. Now let's continue with the story. Grand Maester Pycelle is the first piece to move. It is done with the gentleness of a trap that never shows its teeth. A quiet conversation about the burdens of age, the dignity of rest, the king's great respect for a man who has served through so many reigns. Pycelle, who has served through so many reigns precisely because he understands which direction the wind is blowing, recognizes something different in Robert's eyes and accepts the retirement with the careful gratitude of a man who suspects the alternative was worse. He is gone from the small council within a fortnight, and the Maester who replaces him is a man from the Citadel with ink-stained fingers and no particular allegiance to any house except the one that holds his stipend. And that house now is Ned Stark's. Varys is a different problem. Varys cannot be removed, not yet, not without exposing the shape of what is being built. But Varys's little birds, those small forgettable children moving through the walls of the Red Keep like water through stone, can be found. Robert does not do this himself. He does not even ask Ned to do it directly. He asks a question to the right person, and that person asks a question to another, and within 3 weeks, there exists a rough map of the Whispering Network, drawn in a hand that no one will trace back to the king. Varys does not yet know the map exists. This is the only advantage that will matter, and Robert intends to spend it carefully. The testimony comes slowly, and then all at once, the way understanding always comes. Household records, a dismissed stable hand who once saw something on a night he should not have been walking. The careful, incriminating geometry of Jaime's movements through the years, where he was stationed, when he was absent from his post, which chambers he was known to visit without announcement. None of it is proof enough to stand alone. All of it together is something that begins to look like a case that cannot be dismissed as the paranoia of a grieving man or the cruelty of a king seeking to be rid of an inconvenient queen. Robert has watched this fail before in the version of his life where he did nothing. He does not intend to watch it fail again. Ned reviews the documents on a night when the rain is driving hard against the shutters of the small solar Robert has commandeered for these particular meetings. He reads slowly, the way Ned reads everything, as though each word carries the weight of the consequence attached to it, as though speed would be disrespectful to the gravity of the thing. When he sets the last page down, he does not speak immediately. Robert waits. Outside, the rain intensifies. "This is enough," Ned says finally. and his voice is the voice of a man who has been hoping it would not be enough and has found that hope unsuccessful. Nearly, Robert says. He reaches across the table and turns the last page face down. Nearly enough. There's one more thing I need before I move against her. One witness who cannot be bought and will not be silenced. He does not name the witness yet. He looks at the rain on the window. He is thinking about timing, about the arrangement of pieces, about a particular person within the Red Keep who has seen more than they have ever been asked to confirm. He is thinking about how to ask the question in a way that protects the answer. He is thinking about what Cersei will do when she realizes the walls have been watching her as long as she believed she was watching everyone else. Ned is watching him with those gray Stark eyes that miss very little. Who? He asks. Robert picks up a cup, but does not drink from it. The name, when he speaks it, is quiet enough that the rain nearly swallows it. But Ned hears it, and what crosses Ned's face in the moment after is not surprise so much as the grim recognition of a man who should have asked that question years ago in another life when it might have mattered sooner. The name settles into the room like a stone dropped into still water, and the ripples are already moving outward before Robert sets the cup back down. He does not hurry. He has learned in the second life that the man who hurries is the man who reveals how much he fears being too late. He has been too late before. He knows what that costs. So he waits 3 more days and he arranges his pieces. And when the morning comes that he finally sends for Cersei, it is a gray and windless morning, and the Red Keep feels like a held breath. The solar she keeps is a beautiful room. She has always understood that beauty is a kind of armor. The light falls through tall windows in pale columns, and the furniture is carved from pale wood, and everything in the space has been chosen to suggest a woman who belongs to refinement the way water belongs to the sea. She receives them standing, which is itself a calculation. She does not sit, because sitting would suggest she was caught unaware, and Cersei Lannister is never unaware, or so she has always arranged for the world to believe. Robert enters with Ned at his left shoulder and Barristan Selmy at his right, and he watches her read the room in a single sweep of those green eyes. He watches her see the witnesses and understand that this is not a private confrontation. He watches something shift in her expression, not fear, not yet, but the adjustment of a player who has detected that the board has changed while she was not looking. He places the confessions on her writing table without a word. She does not touch them. She looks at them the way a queen looks at something placed before her by someone who has forgotten their station. "Whatever these are," she says, and her voice is composed, measured, carrying the particular cold music of a woman who has spent decades perfecting contempt. "I am certain they were obtained through methods that speak more to desperation than to truth." Robert lets her finish. He has given her that. He is, in this moment, extraordinarily patient. Then he tells her what they contain, plainly, without inflection. And he watches the composure hold, and he watches it hold, and he watches it begin, very quietly, to crack at the edges. He tells her things that are not in the confessions. He tells her the color of a particular afternoon in a particular corridor, a detail so precise and so impossible that the blood leaves her face in a single, visible retreat. He tells her something she said once, quietly in darkness, to a man she believed was the only living soul who heard it. He does not explain how he knows. He does not need to. The knowing is the point. The knowing is the wall she has run into at full speed, and he watches her stand before it with all her momentum suddenly and completely gone. "You cannot," she begins. She stops. She recalculates. "There is no one who could have told you that." And in saying it, she has already said everything. Ned does not move. Baratheon does not move. Both men are witnesses in the most complete sense, absorbing not only words, but the architecture of what is happening. The way a confession can be built, not from what is admitted, but from what is denied, and then not denied, and then simply left standing in the silence, like a statue that cannot be taken down. Cersei confesses in the way that mountains confess to erosion, not suddenly, not dramatically, but through the gradual and irreversible removal of everything that had been holding the shape together. Her voice, when it finally abandons the performance, is cold in a different way. Cold the way iron is cold, without any of the warmth it once pretended to. She does not weep. She is not that kind of woman, and Robert has never expected her to be. She simply tells him what is true, and every word is a stone removed from a wall she spent years building. And when it is done, the room is very quiet. He does not have her seized. He does not summon guards with the theatrical urgency of a man who wants the court to witness his power. He tells her what will happen, and he tells her in the same even voice that he has used for everything in this room, because the voice is another kind of statement. 3 Maesters, men of no Lannister connection and no Baratheon debt, will examine the children. She will not prevent this. She will be escorted before the day's last bell to a sept beyond the city walls, comfortable, guarded, and removed from every instrument of influence she has spent years accumulating. Her seals are already revoked. Her household has already been quietly reorganized. The letters to Casterly Rock have already been written and need only be dispatched. She looks at him then with something that is almost a kind of recognition, as if she is seeing for the first time something in him that she cannot account for, some quality that does not belong to the Robert she married, some depth she never expected and cannot now explain. The riders leave King's Landing before the sun touches the hills, carrying letters sealed with the king's own hand, letters addressed to a man in a golden castle who has always believed the debt ran in one direction only. Tywin Lannister will open them by firelight, and the fire will cast long shadows across a face that gives nothing away. But his hands, by all accounts, will be very still. Tywin Lannister reads the letter twice. This is itself a tell, for men who knew him understood that he read important things once and only once, that a second reading meant something in the first had unsettled him, had required the rare luxury of confirmation. The fire throws its amber light across his face, and the shadows in the solar are long and indifferent, and the letter lies flat against the table beneath one open hand, and that hand does not move. His steward waits. His maester waits. The silence in Casterly Rock that night is the kind of silence that precedes the reordering of the world. What does a man like Tywin Lannister do when he has been outmaneuvered? Not humiliated. Humiliation requires witnesses, and the letter arrived in private. But outmaneuvered genuinely and cleanly by a man he had spent decades measuring and finding predictable? He does not grieve. He does not panic. He calculates. He sets the letter aside and asks for wine, and then does not drink it. And the Maester later reports that the Lord of Casterly Rock simply stared at the fire for a very long time, moving nothing but his eyes. By morning, the orders are given. 12,000 men, the cold pride of the Westerlands, assembled over a fortnight with the mechanical precision that is the Lannister gift, begin to form at Casterly Rock. Not marching. Not yet. Forming. The distinction matters to Tywin because distinction always matters to him. Because a man who marches is committed to a direction, and a man who assembles retains his options, and Tywin Lannister has survived this long by never relinquishing options before he must. The letter that travels back to King's Landing in response is not an apology. It is not a threat precisely. It is a document of breathtaking cold legality, framed with the patience of a man who writes as though each sentence will be read by historians. It demands the restoration of Cersei's position. It frames the cancellation of the crown's debts not as a king's prerogative, but as an act of economic aggression against the realm's foremost house. It does not say war. It does not need to. The 12,000 men forming at Casterly Rock say it for him. But Robert has opened these letters already in another life, in a life that never quite happened, but that he carries nonetheless, and he knows what they mean. He knows how Tywin thinks, knows the architecture of the man's patience, knows that the gold and the legality and the measured language are all the same instrument aimed at the same end. Paralysis, the slow entanglement of the crown and obligation until action becomes impossible. He has watched it work before, across that other life, watched a court slowly surrender to the weight of Lannister credit and Lannister proximity and Lannister silence. He will not watch it again. The Raven to Dragonstone leaves before the response letter from Casterly Rock has even arrived. Stannis Baratheon, who has spent years on that gray island, cultivating his suspicions and his discipline in equal measure, receives the order with something that might, in another man, have been called relief. The fleet at Dragonstone is battle-ready in a way that courts rarely produce, and isolation occasionally does. Stannis does not ask why. He prepares. He will understand the why soon enough, and understanding, for Stannis, has always been secondary to the doing of what duty requires. The orders to Riverrun are more delicate. House Tully has always been a house of feeling, which means it has always been a house that required different handling than houses of calculation or ambition. Hoster Tully is an old man now, but old men with daughters remember certain things, and the things he remembers about the Lannisters and his own blood involve a wedding and a war, and the particular silence that follows when powerful families consume the people connected to them. The message from Robert is direct and human in a way that surprises the Maester who helps draft it. It asks. It does not command. It reminds without threatening. The River Lords begin to stir before the Lannister gold can begin its patient work of buying loyalty from the edges inward, because Robert has moved with a speed that Tywin's model of him never allowed for. And then there is Jaime. Barristan Selmy does not enjoy this. He carries out the order because he carries out orders that are lawful, and this one is lawful, and because the man he serves has given it with clear eyes and a steady voice, and without the cruelty that lesser kings might have brought to such a moment. But he does not enjoy it. He finds the Kingslayer in the yard at practice, because Jaime Lannister has always fought best when fighting kept the mind from thinking, and he crosses the yard without hurry, and the words he speaks are quiet enough that only the two of them hear them. Jaime lowers his sword. He looks at Barristan for a long moment, and then looks past him. as if calculating distances, exits, possibilities. He finds none that satisfy him. The two men walk inside together, and the yard empties quickly. The way yards empty when something has happened that witnesses understand they should not have witnessed. The choice is put to Jaime in a room without windows by a king who sits across a table from him with the stillness of a man who has already decided every outcome and found himself prepared for each of them. Confess. Resign the white cloak. Return to Casterly Rock diminished, but alive. Or face the full weight of a crown that is no longer distracted, no longer indebted, and no longer looking away. Jaime says nothing for a long time. His golden hand rests on the table, and then Robert slides a piece of parchment across the wood toward him, and at the top of it, in neat formal script, is a name that Jaime has not expected to see. The name on the parchment is Stannis Baratheon. Jaime stares at it. He does not speak. He does not need to, because Robert is not asking him a question. He is showing him a fact, the way a man might show another man the edge of a cliff before explaining which direction they will both be walking. The name sits there in its neat formal script, patient and immovable, and what it communicates is this. The board is already being rearranged. The pieces are already moving, and Jaime Lannister, for all his gilded brilliance, is no longer among the ones doing the moving. He signs the parchment. He leaves the room. What happens after is a quiet thing, a diminishment conducted without ceremony, and Robert does not watch him go. He is already thinking about the harbor. The royal fleet arrives on a morning of gray water and cold light, 40 warships moving in formation through the bay, with the kind of unhurried confidence that belongs only to men who have been given real authority and know how to wear it. They come in tight columns, flags snapping in the harbor wind, and at the prow of the lead vessel stands a figure who is not difficult to pick out even at distance. Rigid, upright, arms folded behind his back, eyes already cataloging the shoreline, the fortifications, the positioning of every vessel in the bay, with the particular intensity of a man who has never once in his life looked at anything casually. Stannis Baratheon has come to King's Landing. He has come because he was summoned. And Stannis always comes when summoned because duty is the architecture of the man. Every beam, every joint, every stone of him mortared together with obligation. He does not come happily. He does not come with any great hope of reward, because experience has taught him that reward is what other people receive, and duty is what he is handed in its place. He has served faithfully at Dragonstone, maintained the fleet, kept his ships in order, watched lesser men receive lesser positions with greater fanfare, and he has done all of this with the grinding, tireless endurance of a millstone, producing something useful, acknowledged by no one. He does not expect today to be different. He is wrong. Robert meets him at the dock, which is itself unusual enough to put a crease of suspicion between Stannis's gray eyes. Kings do not meet arrivals at docks. Kings receive people in throne rooms, behind layers of ceremony designed to remind visitors of their relative smallness. The fact that Robert stands here in plain view, in practical clothes, without the full apparatus of court surrounding him, registers to Stannis the way an unexpected move registers to a chess player, as something requiring immediate reassessment. They embrace, because Robert has decided they will embrace, and he pulls his brother in with a force that is entirely genuine. Stannis endures it. Then, because something in him responds despite everything, he returns it. Briefly, with the stiffness of a man whose body has forgotten how to demonstrate affection, but whose hands remember that it exists. Robert steps back. He looks at his brother, at the lines that have deepened around Stannis' eyes, the gray threading through his dark hair. The jaw set so permanently rigid, it seems less a feature of his face than a decision he made once and never revisited. And what Robert sees is not just his brother. He sees the man from the visions, the man standing on a frozen field, burning his daughter because a red-eyed woman told him it was necessary. He sees the desperation that has not yet arrived, living quietly inside a person who does not yet know it is coming, and the weight of that knowledge sits heavy on him like armor. He makes his decision. He made it weeks ago, but he makes it again now, in this moment, with the harbor wind and the gray light and the 40 warships at their backs. I am giving you 2 appointments, Robert says. Not a preamble, not a softening. He says it the way Stannis himself would say it, without decoration, because he understands instinctively that ornamentation will make his brother distrust the thing being offered. Master of ships, which you have earned 10 times over and been denied without cause, and hand of the king, which I should have given you at the beginning of all this, and did not, and that failure is mine. Stannis says nothing. The silence between them is not empty, it is extremely full, packed with 17 years of precise, careful accounting, every slight tallied, every overlooked contribution entered into a ledger that Stannis has never shown anyone, but has also never once stopped keeping. He is a man who believes in records. He believes the truth of a thing lives in what was actually done, not in what people choose to remember. And the record, as he has kept it, does not include a moment like this one. He does not cry. He will not. But something moves across his face, not quickly, not dramatically, but with the slow and tectonic quality of something that has been under enormous pressure for a very long time, beginning, at last, to shift. His jaw tightens. His eyes are steady. His hands at his sides close into fists and then open again. I accept, he says. 2 words. Stannis has never needed more than 2 words when 2 will do. Robert nods. Then he says, come inside. There's more you need to hear, and none of it is easy, and I will not soften it for you because I know you would not want me to. Stannis almost produces something that might, in another man, have been the beginning of a smile. When have you ever softened anything? It is not a question. Robert does not treat it as one. They walk through the city together, these 2 brothers, and the small folk who see them do not entirely understand what they are witnessing. Only that something has changed in the configuration of power at the top of the world, the way people understand weather before they can name the storm. What Robert tells him takes 2 hours and most of a fire's worth of wood. He tells it plainly, beginning at the beginning, which in this case means beginning at the end of everything. The long night descending on a kingdom hollowed out by a war that served no one. The dead walking in their uncountable numbers. The living reduced to desperate and fractious remnants huddled in the cold. He tells Stannis about the Red Woman, about Dragonstone and the fires, about a daughter who deserved none of what was done to her. He does not dress any of it in mercy. Stannis receives it the way a general receives a terrain map of ground he will have to cross, taking in every feature, every obstacle, every dangerous pass and frozen river, making no sound of protest because protest does not change terrain. What he feels about it is a private and sealed thing. What he does with it is the only part that matters. The woman, he says, when Robert finishes, Melisandre. She will come regardless. Belief finds its vessels. Then she comes to a court that has already been warned of her. Stannis pauses, and to a man who will not be desperate enough to need what she offers. This is the calculation Robert has been waiting for him to reach, because Stannis, given accurate information, is one of the finest strategic minds in the realm. Desperation had been the lever Melisandre used. Remove the desperation. Give Stannis the recognition, the resources, the standing he was always owed, and the lever has nothing to press against. It is not that the Red Woman becomes powerless. It is that she becomes unnecessary, and Stannis has never in his life accepted a tool he did not need. Robert leans forward. Now, the treasury. This is where Stannis' eyes sharpen into something almost ferocious, because finance is a domain he understands with the same unforgiving precision he brings to everything else. The crown's debt to the Lannisters is not simply a number, it is a chain. It is the mechanism by which Tywin Lannister keeps his hands on the throat of the throne without ever needing to draw a sword. Because a crown that owes its existence to Lannister gold must, in the end, govern according to Lannister interests. This is not conspiracy. It is arithmetic. Robert spreads the figures across the table. Stannis studies them without speaking for a long time, moving through the columns with the patient ruthlessness of a man auditing a war. The Iron Bank first, Stannis says finally. Open new terms, restructure the repayment across a longer horizon, and offer them something they value more than interest. Stability. Stannis says it flatly, because it is obvious once you see it. Braavosi bankers do not love gold so much as they love certainty, and a restructured, sustainable crown debt with a competent hand managing the books is worth more to them than a bloated loan accruing interest against a throne that might not survive the decade. The levies, Robert says. And here is the true instrument, not dramatic, not violent, not the kind of move that makes for songs or stories, but devastating in its slow and grinding effectiveness. The current levy structure is, like many things in Westeros, an artifact of compromise and favoritism, an historical accident, a patchwork of exemptions and preferential rates that has, over generations, concentrated tax burden on the smaller houses and common people, while the great lords shelter behind arrangements made by ancestors long dead. Tywin Lannister has not invented this system. He has simply benefited from it more than anyone else, because the Westerlands levy arrangements are among the most favorable in the realm, and Lannister gold has never been taxed at a rate that might slow its accumulation. Stannis understands immediately. He is already doing the arithmetic. Equitable restructuring across all 7 kingdoms, he says, applied uniformly, no house exempt. It is not a punishment aimed at Casterly Rock, Robert says. It is simply the law, applied without exception for the first time in living memory. Tywin cannot object to fairness without revealing that his power depends on unfairness. The silence between them has a different quality now, not the emotional weight of an hour ago, but the precise and taut silence of 2 men who have found the edge of something important and are both looking at it from the same angle. He will know what we are doing, Stannis says. Yes. He will begin making other preparations. Yes. and we will be watching for them. Robert looks at his brother across the table, across the maps and the figures, and the long evening light falling through the solar's narrow windows. This is why I needed you here, not because I trust anyone else to hold this line without flinching. Stannis looks at him for a moment, then he reaches across the table and picks up a quill. He begins to write, numbers first, then proposed rates, then the legal language that will make those rates binding. Because Stannis does not simply agree to things, he constructs them load-bearing and precise so that they will hold weight when weight is placed upon them. He has been writing for perhaps 20 minutes, and Robert has been reviewing his own correspondence in the same room, when a knock comes at the door and a steward enters with a sealed letter. Robert breaks the wax. He reads it. His expression does not change, but the quality of his stillness shifts in a way that Stannis, who has spent a lifetime reading the subtleties of people others dismiss as unreadable, notices immediately. "What is it?" Stannis says. Not a question, an assessment. Robert sets the letter on the table between them, face up. It is from Casterly Rock. It is in Tywin Lannister's hand. Economical, controlled, the penmanship of a man who treats even written correspondence as a demonstration of discipline. It is addressed not to the king, but to the hand of the king. It arrived, Robert understands, before anyone at Casterly Rock could possibly have known that Stannis Baratheon had been appointed to that position, which means it was sent before today. Which means Tywin Lannister has been expecting this. The letter contains 3 sentences. That is all. 3 sentences written in the hand of the most dangerous man in Westeros, addressed to a position that did not exist when the ink dried, and each sentence is a small, precise blade. Robert reads it again, not because he has forgotten its contents, but because he is measuring the distances between the words, the way a general measures the ground between armies before deciding where to make his stand. Tywin Lannister has not threatened. He has informed. There is a difference, and the difference is everything. Stannis reads it in turn. He sets it back on the table with the careful deliberateness of a man handling something that might yet prove explosive. Neither of them speaks for a long moment, and the silence in the room is not uncomfortable. It is the silence of 2 men doing precise work inside their own minds, checking calculations, revising estimates, arriving at conclusions through separate paths that nonetheless converge at the same point. What Tywin has written in 3 economical sentences is a declaration of expectation. He expects to be consulted. He expects that certain arrangements will continue undisturbed. He expects, in the civil and perfectly controlled language of a man who has never needed to raise his voice because he has always had the power to simply end things, that the crown will remember where its gold comes from. Robert folds the letter and puts it in his jacket. Stannis does not ask why. He already knows. The response to Tywin Lannister will not be written at a desk. It takes 11 days to move 20,000 men out of King's Landing. 11 days of logistics that would have bored the Robert of another life into a spectacular rage. The provisioning, the order of march, the negotiations between bannermen about precedence and positioning that seem like vanity until you understand that in a host this size, wounded pride becomes a tactical liability before the first sword is drawn. But this Robert does not rage. He sits with his marshals in the evenings, and he asks questions that are not the questions of a king who merely wants battles won. They are the questions of a man who understands that the battle itself is almost secondary to what the battle means, who is watching it from the outside and the inside at the same time, and who already knows that the most important thing about this war will be how it ends, not how it is fought. He rides at the head of the column himself. The royal banner flies over him, the crowned stag on gold and black. And there are men in that army who have fought with Robert Baratheon, who have stood beside him at the trident and watched him move through battle like a force of weather. And when they look at him now, they feel something that is difficult to name, but impossible to mistake. It is the feeling of soldiers who are not merely being led, but being aimed. He is a weapon that has learned to point itself. Tywin moves first, as Robert knew he would. The Lannister host crosses into the Riverlands before the royal army has cleared the God's Eye, and 2 villages burn. Small places, sworn to minor Tully bannermen, the kind of villages that appear on no map anyone at court would consult. And the message is not written in the flames, but in the selection of them. Tywin is not destroying things he values. He is demonstrating what he is willing to destroy, and the demonstration is aimed not at the Tullys, but at the Iron Throne, which is to say at Robert, which is to say at the man Tywin Lannister believes he already understands completely. This is Tywin's great miscalculation. He has modeled a king. He is facing something else entirely. The armies meet at a ford on the Red Fork, where the water runs shallow and the banks on either side rise steeply into treeline. And it is ground that Tywin's scouts have assessed as favorable, a narrow crossing that limits the advantage of a larger force, terrain that rewards discipline and formation over raw numbers. It is, by any conventional measure, a reasonable place for the Lannister army to make its stand. Tywin has built his position the way he builds everything, methodically, with attention to the variables he can see, with a general's confidence in a general's understanding of the board. What Tywin cannot see are the 3,000 men Robert has moved through the tree line over the preceding 2 nights, light cavalry and longbowmen, quiet work done in darkness by soldiers who understood that they were not simply outflanking an army, but dismantling a certainty. Robert has spent 2 nights riding with them personally, not out of sentiment, but because there are moments when a king's presence is itself a tactical instrument, and this is one of them. These men will do what needs doing, because they have been trained and paid and ordered to, but they will do it with a different quality of commitment, because the man who wears the crown is cold and muddy and sleepless among them, and that is not nothing. That is never nothing. The flanking movement completes itself in the gray hours before dawn on the 3rd day. When the sun rises fully over the Red Fork, the Lannister host discovers that the ford they hold is not a strong position. It is a trap. The river is at their backs, and the tree line on both sides has become, overnight, an extension of Robert's army, and the geometry of the thing is immediately apparent to every experienced soldier in the Lannister ranks, apparent and irreversible. Tywin Lannister sits his horse on a slight rise at the center of his formation and surveys what has been done to him. He does this for a long time. He is not a man who requires extended exposure to a problem before he understands it, which means the length of his stillness is not calculation. It is something rarer, something that takes longer to process than tactical information. It is the first honest encounter with his own limits that Tywin Lannister has experienced in perhaps 20 years. A rider comes from the royal position. He carries no weapon and bears a white cloth, and the message he delivers is simple. The king will receive Lord Tywin's surrender at midday, at the water's edge, with witnesses from both armies present. Tywin's response takes an hour to arrive. When it does, it is acceptance. Nothing more, nothing qualified, nothing requesting amended terms. Just acceptance, because Tywin Lannister understands leverage as well as any man alive, and he understands that the leverage in this moment belongs entirely to the crowned stag, and that to die on this riverbank with 10,000 Lannister soldiers would be to end House Lannister in truth, not merely in pride. And Tywin has always been willing to sacrifice anything except the house itself. He kneels at the edge of the Red Fork with mud on his boots and the full gaze of both armies upon him. And the silence when it happens is extraordinary. The kind of silence that occurs when a myth dissolves in real time, when something that has functioned as a fixed point in the world's understanding of itself simply ceases to be fixed. The soldiers of the Lannister host watch their lord's knee touch the earth, and something moves through them that is not quite shame and not quite relief, but is some compound of both that will take years to fully settle. The soldiers of the royal army watch, and what moves through them is simpler. The understanding that this king is not what they expected, that what they rode out with was not simply a force of arms, but a force of something harder to name and much harder to stop. Robert's terms are read aloud by Stannis, who has ridden in the vanguard and who delivers each condition in the same flat, unsparing voice he would use to read a trade agreement. Because Stannis understands that the indignity of these terms is not diminished by dramatic delivery. It is, if anything, sharpened by plainness. The Lannister host disbands to 3,000 household guards. Casterly Rock's gold production submits to direct crown taxation for 20 years. Tywin Lannister holds no political office now or in future at the pleasure of the Iron Throne. There is a moment when the third term is read when something crosses Tywin Lannister's face. Not rage. Tywin has mastered rage so completely that it no longer visits him in its raw form. It is something more structural, like the expression of a building registering a load it was not designed to bear. He absorbs it. He accepts it. He rises from his knee with the deliberate control of a man who will not give his conqueror the satisfaction of watching him struggle to stand, and his face, by the time he is fully upright, has arranged itself back into its customary stillness. Robert watches this from horseback. He watches it with the particular attention of a man who is not admiring his victory, but studying his enemy, because Tywin Lannister defeated and stripped of resources is still Tywin Lannister, and the mind that built what was just dismantled is still operating, still measuring, still constructing things load-bearing and precise. The armies begin to separate. The Lannister host turns west, and Tywin rides at its head with the bearing of a man who has already begun, before the ford is even out of sight, to think about what is possible within the new constraints, what can be built in the space that remains, what 20 years actually is, and what it is not, and what a man of his particular capabilities might do with it. Robert watches until the last Lannister banner disappears into the tree line. Then he turns his horse and says something quiet to the rider beside him. Not Stannis, who has ridden ahead to oversee the column's reordering, but a younger man, a captain of the household guard named Rowan, who has served the king since before the war and who receives the words with a nod that suggests he understands their weight. What Robert has said, quietly at the edge of a ford on the Red Fork, is this: send riders to the Citadel. He wants a Meister of particular expertise in financial records and another in contract law, and he wants them in King's Landing within a fortnight. Not because the terms require it, because Tywin Lannister has just been given 20 years, and Robert Baratheon has learned, at considerable cost, in a life he carries in his bones like an old wound, exactly what Tywin Lannister can do with 20 years when no one is watching the work. The riders go, the column moves, the Red Fork catches the afternoon light in the way that rivers do when the fighting is done, and the only sound is water, and somewhere to the west, moving at the unhurried pace of a man conserving his strength for what comes next, Tywin Lannister rides toward Casterly Rock with his 3,000 men and the long arithmetic of what he has lost, and what, perhaps in time, he might yet recover. The road north is long, and Robert Baratheon rides it with the particular patience of a man who has already wasted one lifetime reaching Winterfell too late for every reason that mattered. He does not rush. He does not send couriers ahead with the usual breathless announcements of royal arrival, the demands for ceremony, and prepared feasts and bannermen assembled in their finest wool. He sends one raven. It carries 4 words in his own hand: I am coming north. Ned will understand the rest. Ned, of all men, has always understood the rest. The column moves through the neck as autumn deepens around it, the air carrying that particular northern cold that presses against the chest like a reminder, like a hand on the sternum saying, pay attention. This is where things become serious. Robert pays attention. He rides near the front, and he watches the land change, the trees growing older, taller, heavier with moss, the sky broadening into something vast and gray and entirely indifferent to kingdoms and their politics. He has been south too long in the life he remembers. South, where everything is warm and calculating, and everyone is playing the same game with the same pieces. Up here, the game is different. Up here, the stakes are written in ice. Winterfell rises ahead of him like something that has not so much been built as grown. Like the land itself decided, at some point in the ancient dark, to push upward and take the shape of a fortress. Steam rises from the hot springs beneath it, ghosting up into the cold air, and the gray stones are slick with moisture that never quite freezes and never quite dries, and the whole place smells of forged smoke and pine and something older still. Robert pulls his horse to a stop at the gate and sits there for a long moment without speaking, and what moves across his face in that moment is something his retinue does not have words for. It is not sentiment. It is not grief. It is the expression of a man who has arrived somewhere he should have arrived much sooner, and who intends to spend the remainder of his strength making up the distance. Ned meets him in the yard, not the hall. The yard. He is standing in the cold with no crown, no ceremony, no performance of courtly reception. And Robert looks at him and feels something loosen in his chest that he did not know was still tight. They grip each other by the forearm in the old way, the way of men who have bled beside each other, and no words are exchanged for several seconds. He does not finish the greeting. He does not need to. Ned's eyes move over him with that careful northern steadiness, reading something in his posture, in the directness of his gaze, and what Ned reads there makes him nod slowly. The way men nod when a long-expected thing has finally arrived. What Robert has come to say cannot be said in a feast hall or a throne room or anywhere that voices carry. He says it in Ned's solar, with a fire burning low and 2 cups of wine going cold between them. He lays it out without ceremony, without softening, the way a field surgeon presents a wound. Here is the damage. Here is the depth of it. Here is what it will require to address before infection takes everything. The Night's Watch is a ruin of its former self. 3 Castle Black and its sister forts are crumbling. The rangers who venture beyond the wall have been returning with stories that no one in King's Landing is willing to hear, because King's Landing is very warm and very far south, and the world beyond the wall is easy to disbelieve from a comfortable distance. But Robert has memories that others do not carry. He has the weight of a future he has already watched unfold, and what unfolds in that future, if nothing is done, is catastrophic in a way that no war between living men has ever been. He uses the words, he says, White Walkers, in the same deliberate tone one would use to say, armies approaching, not as legend, not as old woman's warning, but as strategic intelligence. He watches Ned's face. Ned does not dismiss it. This is why Robert has ridden north, not to find a man who would agree with him out of courtesy, but to find the one man in Westeros who would sit with a thing this terrible and not flinch from its reality. Ned Stark has spent his entire life in the shadow of that wall, and the wall exists for a reason. And Ned has always known the reason, even when the South pretended to have forgotten it. He sits with what Robert has said for a long time, staring into the low fire, and then he begins asking precise, practical questions about numbers, about supply lines, about what burns and what does not, about obsidian and its properties and where it might be found in sufficient quantity. Robert answers each one. He has thought about this for what feels like decades, because in the way that his bones account for time, it has been. The ravens go out within 2 days, Ned's handwriting on one, Robert's seal on another, and together they carry more authority than either would alone. To the Night's Watch, to the Lord Commander, a directive arrives that reads not as request, but as royal command with northern weight behind it. Castle Black will receive crown funding sufficient to triple its garrison within the year. Every fort along the wall will be assessed and repaired in priority order, beginning with those nearest the haunted forest. And there is a third directive, written in Robert's own hand and dispatched separately southward to Dragonstone, where a Maester of the household is instructed to begin immediate calculations of what dragonglass the island holds and at what pace it might be extracted. The word immediately appears twice. The word urgent appears 3 times. Robert has not written the word survival because some words, written plainly, cause men to freeze when they should be moving. But the urgency is there in every sentence, pressing through the formalities like heat through stone. It is on the 3rd night, when the fire has been built higher and Ned's wife has retired and the castle has settled into its deep northern quiet, that Robert sets down his cup and looks at his oldest friend and says the thing he has been carrying since before the column left King's Landing. He says Jon's name. He does not approach it sideways or dress it in ambiguity. He says the boy's name, and he watches Ned go very still in the way that men go still when the thing they have spent years protecting is named aloud by someone who should not know its shape. And then Robert says, I know whose son he is. I have always known, in the life I carry, and I have come to protect him, not to use him." What passes across Ned Stark's face in that moment is not something that has a simple name. It is the collapse of a long-held weight and the simultaneous arrival of a new uncertainty. And beneath both of those, something that might cautiously be called relief. He says nothing for a long time. The fire moves. Somewhere in the castle above them, in a room Robert has never entered, a boy with gray Stark eyes and something quieter and darker behind them sleeps without knowing that two kings, in their different ways, are deciding the shape of his life. The document they draft together is brief, by the standards of royal decrees. It is also sealed twice, once with the direwolf, once with the stag. And when it is finished, it acknowledges, in careful language, that the ward known as Jon Snow bears blood of particular lineage that shall remain a matter of private record between the signatories, protected under crown seal from political exploitation or dynastic weaponization, designated in law as a ward and son of Winterfell, subject to no Targaryen claim, and no claimant's use unless the ward himself, upon full manhood, elects otherwise. Robert signs it. Ned signs it. The wax seals cool in the quiet of the solar. Outside, snow has begun to fall. The first real snowfall of the season, heavy and unhurried, settling across the courtyard and the battlements and the great gray stones of Winterfell with the indifference of something far older than any treaty between men. Robert stands at the window for a moment and watches it come down. And what he is thinking is not about Jon Snow, and not about Ned, and not about the document cooling behind him. He is thinking about the wall. He is thinking about what he knows is beyond it, moving slowly in the dark and the cold, patient in the way that only things without politics and without ambition can be patient. Things that do not negotiate, and do not hesitate, and do not stop. And he is thinking that what he and Ned have done here, in 3 days of conversation and cold wine and careful writing, is the beginning of a response to something that no king before him ever chose to take seriously, while there was still time to do so. It is only a beginning. The ravens have gone. The Dragonglass order has been sent. The garrison funding is pledged. But when Ned enters the room behind him and stands at the other side of the window, looking out at the same falling snow, he says something quiet that Robert does not immediately answer. He says that there is a boy at Castle Black. A ranger's report, arrived that same morning, describes something seen at the edge of the haunted forest. A fire where no wildling camp should be, moving in a pattern that suggests neither random flight nor organized settlement. The ranger who filed the report requested guidance and received none, because no guidance existed for such things. Ned turns from the window, and his expression carries the particular gravity of a man who understands that the conversation they have been having for 3 days has just become more immediate than either of them intended. Robert's hand tightens slowly on the sill. The snow falls on the Capitol, and the snow falls on the wall, and neither knows the other exists. That is the truth of the world. Distance makes strangers of catastrophes, and what burns on one side of the world casts no light on the other. But Robert Baratheon, who has lived this history once and watched it collapse under its own weight, understands something that took him a lifetime to learn and a death to finally absorb. The fires you ignore are the fires that find you. He turns from the window. He turns from Ned's expression and the ranger's report and the moving flame at the edge of the haunted forest, and he walks to the table, and among the letters still waiting to be read is a dispatch from Varys. Varys, who still serves. Varys, who serves now under conditions so carefully circumscribed that the man himself has commented, in that silken and unreadable tone, that it feels less like a position and more like a leash. Robert did not dispute this. A leash, he told him, is still attached to something living. The alternative was not. And so Varys serves, monitored, reduced, stripped of certain networks, and permitted others, and in return, he delivers intelligence that Robert could not reliably produce through any other instrument. The arrangement is pragmatic. Robert does not pretend otherwise. Neither does Varys. The dispatch is brief. Essos dispatches are always brief, because brevity is expensive when the distance is great. But the content is not small. Viserys Targaryen has sold his sister. That is the blunt translation of the political architecture. A young woman of royal blood exchanged for an army she will never command, bound to a man she has never met, sent across a grass sea she has never seen, in service of a conquest she did not choose. Robert reads the sentence twice, not because he does not understand it, because understanding it fully requires a moment. He knew this happened. He ordered her death the first time, and even in that ordering he understood, somewhere beneath the anger and the wine and the hard certainty of a king who feared a name more than he feared a person, that she was not his enemy. She was a girl. She was a girl her brother used as currency, and Robert added his own violence to hers by making her a target, and she survived everything, and she came back across the sea with fire, and she burned half the world, and he was not alive to see it, because the boar had already finished him first. He does not order her death. He does not even consider it. What he considers, standing at that table with the dispatch in his hand and Ned still waiting at the window, is what a message costs, and what silence costs, and which expenditure serves the greater interest. He writes the letter himself. This is not a task for a maester. This is not a letter that should exist in any official archive. He writes it in his own hand, which is not elegant. Robert Baratheon was never a man of elegant letters. But it is direct, and directness, he has come to understand, is its own form of respect. He writes that he killed her father. He writes that he killed her brother Rhaegar, and that this was war, and that he offers no apology for war, because apology without accountability is merely noise, but that she should understand, he does not wish her dead. He writes that she is granted formal exile. He uses that phrase precisely, formal exile, because precision matters in documents that will be read by someone deciding whether to trust them. He writes that her children, should she have them, would not be hunted by his crown. He writes one condition, stated plainly. She does not move toward Westeros while Robert lives. That is all. That is the entire architecture of the offer. A wall, not a cage. The emissary he selects is a merchant by identity, and a careful man by nature, fluent in the trade tongue, with no obvious connection to the Red Keep. The gold he sends with the letter is enough to matter, enough that it cannot be mistaken for contempt, but not so much that it announces itself as an attempt at purchase. The gold is for her, not for Drogo, not for Viserys, for her. The emissary is instructed on this point with unusual specificity. He rides, he sails, he crosses distances that make the Seven Kingdoms feel like a room. And when the letter reaches her, when Daenerys Targaryen reads the words written in the rough hand of the man who took everything her family was, she does not reply. She sits with it. The emissary watches her sit with it in a tent that smells of leather and horse and the particular dry heat of the grass sea. And what he sees, and what he dutifully reports upon his return, is that she wept, not with grief precisely, not with rage, with something that has no clean political name. The particular release of a woman who has been waiting for the world to acknowledge that she exists as something other than a threat. What the weeping accomplishes, without her intending it, without anyone designing it, is structural. Because the argument Viserys has been making to Drogo, the argument that is the entire foundation of his leverage, his purpose, his presence in the Khalasar, is that the usurper fears them. That fear is the source of his importance. Without fear, there is no army. Without the army, there is no crown. Without the crown, Viserys Targaryen is simply a man with a bad temper and an inflated sense of inheritance, standing in a foreign land among people who do not share his language or his gods or his patience. The letter removes the fear, not because it is kind, it is not especially kind, but because it is deliberate, and deliberateness signals the opposite of fear. A man who is afraid does not offer formal exile. A man who is afraid does not write the letter himself and sign it with his real name. A man who is afraid sends assassins. Robert sent a merchant with gold and a document that treated her like a person rather than a problem. And the message beneath the message, the one Viserys cannot argue away, is that the king across the water has already accounted for her and moved on. Viserys does not move on. Viserys accelerates. His demands on Drogo become louder and less strategic, stripped of patience by the particular desperation of a man who senses his narrative collapsing. He pushes in ways that are unwise. He pushes in ways that read to Dothraki eyes as weakness dressed as arrogance, which is the most dangerous combination a guest can present to a host. The fracture between the siblings, always present, widens until it is a canyon. And then, on a night that the emissary is no longer there to witness, in a dispute that has nothing to do with Westeros and everything to do with pride and the absolute limits of Dothraki tolerance, Viserys Targaryen dies. Not crowned with gold, not in the throne room he imagined, in a way that history will barely record, because history requires witnesses who care, and no one in that tent cares very much about the last bad prince of a dead dynasty. Daenerys does not send word, but she keeps the letter. Back in King's Landing, Robert does not yet know any of this. He knows only what he sent. He knows the gamble he placed and the reasoning behind it. He turns back to Ned, who's been waiting with the patience of a man trained to wait, and he looks at the ranger's report again. The fire at the edge of the haunted forest, moving in a pattern that no natural thing should move. And he feels the weight of multiple simultaneous emergencies pressing at him from opposite directions of the compass. East is a girl on the grass sea with a letter and a grief she has not yet finished digesting, and dragons that do not yet exist, but will. North is a fire that moves like it is thinking. He looks at Ned. He asks how credible the ranger is. Ned says he is one of the most experienced men on the wall. Robert sets the Varys dispatch aside and picks up the ranger's report, and outside the window the snow continues to fall, and in the east the grass sea shimmers under a sun that knows nothing of ravens or dragon glass or the slow patient calculations of a king who has already died once and does not intend to make the same mistakes twice. The ledgers arrive in carts. This is not a metaphor. Peter Baelish has kept records, meticulous, beautiful records, the kind of records that a man keeps when he is proud of what he has done, and confident that no one clever enough to read them will ever be permitted to look. 3 carts hauled from the tower of the Hands Annex to the small council chamber, each one stacked with bound volumes that represent 15 years of creative accounting performed by the most gifted financial mind the realm has produced in living memory. Stannis Baratheon sits at the head of the table and opens the first one. He does not look up for 6 hours. What Stannis finds is not immediately obvious. Littlefinger is too careful for obvious. What Stannis finds after 6 hours, and then 12, and then 3 full days of cross-referencing and margin notation, and the kind of sustained concentration that most men cannot maintain through a single afternoon, is a system. A beautiful, terrible system. Loans issued to lords who did not know they were borrowing from the crown's own coffers, interest paid back to accounts that technically belong to the Iron Throne, but practically belong to no one, and therefore belong, in the language of money, to the man who controls the flow. Contracts arranged between merchants and the crown in which the crown accepts a price slightly lower than market value, and a separate private account accepts the difference. 15 years. The numbers, when Stannis finally adds them, are staggering in the way that a canyon is staggering. You stand at the edge of it, and your mind refuses, at first, to accept that something so vast could simply exist without someone noticing. Someone did not notice. Many someones. Robert was among them. He does not flinch from that truth now. He sits across from Stannis on the 4th morning and reads the summary his brother has prepared. Stannis does not do theater, does not pace or gesture or deliver dramatic pronouncements, simply hands Robert a single page with numbers written in a hand so controlled it barely looks human. And Robert reads it twice and then sets it down on the table with the same deliberate calm he has been practicing since he woke on the King's Road with a second life and a first chance to use his mind properly. He says, "Summon Baelish." Peter Baelish enters the chamber with a smile already prepared. He has survived every political climate King's Landing has produced for a generation on the strength of that smile and the intelligence behind it. The ability to read a room, to assess threat, to pivot with the wind before the wind has fully decided which direction it intends to blow. He reads this room. The smile does not disappear exactly. It transforms into something more careful, a narrower version of itself, as he takes in Stannis at the head of the table with the ledgers stacked beside him. Robert seated and still, and the absence of any warmth in either face. He does not get to speak first. Robert does not give him the opening. The trial before the full court takes 3 days. Stannis presents the evidence with the same methodical precision he applied to finding it. No flourish, no condemnation beyond the numbers themselves, and the numbers are condemnation enough. The lords who fill the gallery are not, most of them, friends of justice in the abstract. They are men who understand property and theft and the particular outrage of being stolen from by someone they trusted with the mechanism of their own treasury. The verdict is not in doubt after the first day. The sentencing takes longer because there are those who argue for execution, and they are not wrong on legal grounds. Robert chooses the wall. He announces it himself, standing, and in the silence that follows, he says that a man who spent his life engineering cold and calculated misery, will spend the remainder of it standing watch against the cold itself, and that there is a poetry in that which execution cannot provide. Littlefinger is led from the court with his smile finally, genuinely gone, not frightened, not broken, but already recalculating, his eyes moving even as the guards take his arms. He is still thinking. That is the thing about Petyr Baelish. He is always still thinking. Robert watches him go and makes a note, privately, to send word to Castle Black that this particular recruit should be watched with extraordinary care, that he should be given no access to ravens, no access to funds, no position of administrative authority whatsoever. He does not underestimate what Littlefinger can build from nothing. He has seen what the man builds. Ned Stark is named Hand of the King the following morning. There is no feast. Robert does not want a feast. He wants the thing itself, the substance, and not the ceremony, the actual installation of the one man in the realm whose judgment Robert trusts to operate independently and still arrive at something that resembles justice. Ned accepts the pin without the expression of reluctant duty that Robert remembers from another life. He has been told the truth. He has been told what the role costs and what the stakes are and what Robert needs from him. And he has had time enough to make a genuine decision. And the decision he makes is yes. The first morning they sit together in the solar, Ned reads the Ranger's report again. The same one Robert marked the night before. The fire in the haunted forest, moving in the pattern of something that chooses its direction. And asks a question that Robert has already been turning over in his mind for 3 days. He asks whether it matters at this juncture that the watch is undermanned. He means it practically. He means it as a beginning of a problem they might actually solve if they address it correctly and immediately, rather than allowing it to accumulate to crisis. Robert looks at him and feels something shift in the room. Not warmth exactly, though there is warmth in it, but weight. The weight of two men who understand each other beginning to actually think together. He tells Ned about Renly first. The conversation with his youngest brother happened 4 nights ago in the small hours, in a room with no candles lit and only the fire to see by, and Robert had spoken plainly in the way he has been relearning to speak. Without the performance of authority, without the booming voice that fills a hall and fills nothing else. He told Renly that he knew. He said it simply, that he had known or suspected, and that it did not matter to him in the way that Renly feared it might. What mattered, Robert said, was what Renly intended to do with the Tyrell alliance he was quietly cultivating through the back roads of his personal life, because the Tyrells were the most powerful family in the Reach, and their loyalty to the Iron Throne was a thing that could be secured properly or lost entirely, and Renly hiding his connection to them was not protecting anyone. It was only delaying the moment when the card had to be played. Renly had not spoken for a long time, long enough that the fire shifted and the room changed color. When he did speak, what he said was not what Robert expected, not relief or defiance, or the careful diplomatic repositioning of a younger son who has always had to maneuver for what older sons are simply handed. What Renly said was, "I thought you would use it against me," meaning the knowing, meaning that the older brother he grew up watching had seemed like a man who collected advantages and deployed them when advantageous, and that Renly had spent years bracing for the moment Robert's knowledge became leverage. Robert had sat with that for a moment. Then he said, "I did use it. I used it to ask you to do something honest. that is not nothing. He tells Ned this now in the solar, and Ned listens with the same patience he brings to everything, not passive, not simply absorbing, but processing, weighing, connecting the strand of Renly to the strand of the Tyrells to the larger web of the kingdom's alliances, which is the kind of thinking Robert needs from a hand, and which he has not, until now, actually had. Ned says that Mace Tyrell will require careful handling. Robert agrees. Ned says that a formal alliance through honest diplomacy is better than the informal one they currently have by accident. Robert agrees with that too. Then Ned pauses and looks back at the Rangers' report and says something that neither of them has said aloud yet, though they have both been circling it. He says, "This is not a border problem." Robert does not answer immediately. He looks at the report. The fire that thinks, the Rangers who do not come back, the long summer ending, and the cold mathematics of what comes after summers in this part of the world. He has been thinking about Dragonglass since the meeting with Varys. He has been thinking about a girl on a grass sea who will one day, if everything goes the way it went before and the world cooperates with the pattern, stand before 3 living dragons and call them her children. He has been thinking about how far apart those two things are, geographically and politically and in time, and how the gap between them represents the central problem of the next 10 years. He reaches across the table and picks up a different dispatch. This one came in the night before, routed through 2 ravens originating from a merchant ship out of the Free Cities. He hands it to Ned without speaking. Ned reads it. His expression does not change in any dramatic way. Ned Stark's face is not built for drama, it is built for endurance. But something shifts behind his eyes. He reads it twice. He sets it down. He looks at Robert and says very quietly, "What does this mean for the Wall?" And Robert, who has been waiting for someone to ask exactly that question in exactly that way, leans forward in his chair and begins. He begins, as he always does now, with what he knows, not what he suspects, not what he fears, what he knows. The Raven had come from a Pentoshi merchant who had been on the Dothraki Sea 3 months prior, trading cloth and salt for horses, and who had witnessed something in the night sky above a smoldering funeral pyre that he could not explain in the language of merchants or horses or reasonable men. 3 shapes, winged, crying out in voices that had no name in any tongue he had ever heard. The merchant had written it down because he was, above all things, a man who recorded anomalies. He had not believed what he saw. He had written it down anyway. Robert had believed it before the letter arrived. That is the thing about carrying the future like a stone in the chest. The confirmation does not arrive as a shock. It arrives as a weight shifting, a burden redistributing itself. He had known this was coming the way a man knows a storm from the color of the sky at dawn, and now the storm has a name and a shape and 3 sets of wings, and the knowing does not make it smaller. It makes it larger. It makes it real in a way that the knowing alone never quite could. What if the world's most powerful strategic variable had just announced itself across the narrow sea? What if the balance of every negotiation, every alliance, every quiet arrangement made over the past 3 years had just been altered by a fire on the grass sea and a girl who walked into it and did not burn? What if Robert Baratheon, sitting in his solar with Ned Stark across the table, is the only man in Westeros who understands exactly what that means and exactly how much time he does not have? He leans forward. He begins. the small council is convened the following morning. Not the half-council Robert has been using for quiet business, the selective gatherings where he speaks plainly to Ned and allows Renly his observations and keeps the sharper edges of his thinking away from men he does not trust with sharp things. The full council, every seat filled, Varys in his chair like a spider that has arranged itself into a human shape for the occasion. Littlefinger, with his fingers laced and his eyes doing the quiet arithmetic they are always doing. Grand Master Pycelle, with his parchment and his careful silences. Stannis at the far end of the table, rigid as a sword left in the cold too long. Renly beside him, watching his brother the way a man watches weather. Robert does not soften what he says. That is a choice, and it is a calculated one. The moment demands gravity, and he has learned, across 2 lives now, that men respond to gravity when they can feel the ground shifting beneath them. He tells them what the raven said. He tells them what it means. He does not allow the silence that follows to become comfortable. What if, he says, we could choose the shape of this? What if that choice exists, and exists only now, in this specific window, before the dragons grow too large to be a question of diplomacy, and become instead a question of survival? Stannis objects. Stannis always objects, and Robert has come to find a kind of rough affection for it, the way a man finds affection for a stone in the road that has tripped him often enough to become familiar. Dynastic legitimacy, Stannis says. The precedent of foreign power, a Targaryen restored to influence by Baratheon recognition, is a Baratheon throne undermined by its own hand. He does not raise his voice. He never raises his voice. He simply lays his objections down on the table like blades, one after another, with the precise and joyless efficiency of a man who believes that correctness is its own reward. Robert lets him finish. This too is a choice, because the counter-argument is not an argument at all. It is a frame, and the frame, once placed, cannot be undone. He does not propose to restore a Targaryen to Westeros. He proposes to recognize a foreign queen across the narrow sea, sovereign of a bay and its cities, a ruler with no claim to the Iron Throne, because she has been formally offered something better, legitimacy as herself, in her own lands, in permanent diplomatic alliance with the greatest power in the known world. Not a pretender, not a threat. A partner at a distance, with her dragons pointed away from King's Landing by the gravity of mutual interest. Ned's expression does precisely what Ned's expression does, which is to convey that he is weighing this and has not finished weighing it, but can see the shape of the scales. Littlefinger says nothing, which means he is already calculating what this does to his position and finding it acceptable. Varys folds his hands and says in his softest voice that this is a most prudent vision of the world. Stannis cannot find the legal argument against it. He searches for it. The table watches him search. He does not find it. Robert waits until the silence has lasted precisely long enough. Then he says that the embassy will need to be someone Daenerys Targaryen will receive as a gesture of genuine respect, someone whose name carries weight, someone she will not interpret as a provocation dressed in diplomacy's clothing. He looks at Ned. Ned looks back at him. Neither of them speaks for a long moment, and in that silence, something passes between them that is half old friendship and half the recognition of what is being asked. And Ned sets down his cup and says he would need to leave within the fortnight if the crossing is to be made before winter makes the narrow sea inhospitable. Robert says he knows. And then the door opens, and the page who enters is white-faced, holding a second raven's message. And the color of the boy's face is enough to stop every conversation in the room before a word is spoken. The message is from Castle Black. The Lord Commander's seal is broken before the page has fully crossed the room, and Robert reads it standing, which he almost never does anymore, and the men around the table read his face instead of their cups, and what they see there is not panic. Robert has not panicked in 5 years of deliberate transformation, but something older than panic, something that sits beneath all strategy and all preparation, like bedrock beneath soil. He reads it twice. Then he sets it flat on the table where all of them can see it, and he says nothing, because the words speak with a clarity that requires no translation. The army of the dead is marching, not in the scattered probing numbers the Night's Watch has been reporting for 3 years, not in the raiding formations that the reinforced garrisons have beaten back with dragonglass and fire and hard-won discipline, in numbers that the ranging scouts describe with words that keep losing coherence, as if language itself is failing the men who witnessed it, as if what moves beyond the wall has exceeded the capacity of living tongues to name. What follows is 5 weeks of furious, relentless preparation that would have been impossible without the preceding 5 years of deliberate, exhausting groundwork. The dragonglass caches, the trained cohorts, the supply chains running north along roads Robert ordered, repaired 3 winters ago. All of it now snaps into motion with the terrible efficiency of a machine that has been wound tight for exactly this purpose. Robert does not sleep more than 4 hours in any of those 5 weeks. His Meister stops counting. He does not stay in King's Landing to direct it. That is the first and most significant decision, and it is not a difficult one. He made it years ago, in the quiet of his own certainty, in the part of himself that carried forward what he had once witnessed in another life that ended at a boar's tusks. He knows what the long night requires. It requires the king present. It requires the throne not behind him, but beside him, reduced to what thrones were always meant to be, a symbol in service of living men, rather than a monument demanding their worship. 30,000 march north. It is the largest host the North has seen since the Conqueror's dragons made such numbers a fleeting formality, and the roads bow slightly under the weight of it, and the villages along the King's Road empty of their people into doorways and fields to watch it pass with the expressions of those who understand, in the wordless way that common people often understand before lords do, that this is not a campaign, this is a reckoning. The wagons carry more dragonglass than any one place in Westeros has assembled since the age of the children. Robert's own weapon rides wrapped in oilcloth in his personal cart, a warhammer, the head shaped from a single enormous mass of dragonglass fused to obsidian-reinforced steel, the haft wound in leather so worn already with his practice grip that it has taken the shape of his hands. He is 51 years old. He is not the man who broke the trident. He is something the man at the trident could not have become without dying first. Jon Snow rides at his right hand, 20 years old, broad through the shoulders, carrying his Stark coloring, but something else beneath it in the line of his jaw, in the particular quality of his stillness, that anyone paying close attention would recognize as not entirely northern. He knows who he is. Ned told him 2 years ago, in the Godswood at Winterfell, with the weight of 17 years of love and silence behind it. And Jon received it the way he receives most things, quietly, with a long period of internal processing that produces not crisis, but resolution. He has not pressed the claim. He does not want the throne. What he wants is standing in that column beside the man who rides to his left, the king who looked at him across a courtyard 5 years ago with eyes that saw something Jon was not yet old enough to name, and said nothing except that Ned had taught him well. They do not talk much on the march. They do not need to. Eastwatch by the sea announces the dragons before the ships are visible, a sound like the horizon tearing, low and resonant, felt in the chest before it is heard with the ears. 2 of the 3. The alliance terms specified 2, and Daenerys Targaryen honors her terms with a precision that Robert has come to recognize as the central truth of her character. She is not gracious in the way of those who have surplus to spare, but in the way of those who have decided what they value and defend it absolutely. She stands on the dock before her retinue has fully disembarked, silver-haired in the gray sea wind, smaller than her reputation, but denser somehow, the way certain things are denser, carrying more weight than their dimensions suggest. She is 23 years old. She has survived things that should have killed her 3 times over. Her eyes, when they find Robert's across the dock, are measuring and direct and contain nothing of the deference one queen might perform for a king on his own soil. He respects it immediately and completely. He walks forward without ceremony, without the chamberlain's announcement, and she walks forward to meet him, and they stop 3 paces apart in the cold salt air, with the wall visible in the distance like a scar along the earth's northern edge. And he looks at her for a long moment and says that she looks like her father in certain lights. It is a strange thing to say. It is not a kind thing to say, but it is an honest thing, and she recognizes honesty the same way he does, as the only currency worth exchanging when the stakes have risen past the point where performance has any utility. She says that she has been told she has her mother's temperament when she chooses to use it. He almost smiles. He says that he is glad she brought the dragons and not the temperament. She says she brought both. The dragons simply arrived first. Behind them, the wall exhales a long wind down from its heights, carrying with it a cold that has no season in it. A cold that is not winter's cold, but something older, something that remembers a time before the first men lit their first fires against the dark. Jon Snow stands at the edge of the dock with his hand not quite on his sword, watching the north, and the 2 great shapes circling above them cast shadows that move across the stones like the slow sweep of a sundial, marking time in a language older than any kingdom. The ravens from the ranging parties stop arriving at mid-morning. Every commander present understands what that silence means. Robert turns from Daenerys and looks north, and his face settles into something that is not fear and is not courage, but is the quiet country between them, where men go when they have already made their peace with what is coming and are simply waiting for it to arrive. He orders the dragonglass distributed to Daenerys unsullied before nightfall. It is a gesture that costs him nothing practical and means everything politically, an acknowledgement that what marches toward them cannot be negotiated with, cannot be outmaneuvered, cannot be survived by anything less than the full weight of every living thing that has ever stood against the dark. One of her advisors moves to object. She silences him with a look that is quick and final, and she thanks Robert in the formal Westerosi that she has clearly been practicing. And Robert does not comment on the accent because it is irrelevant, because what she is saying underneath the words is that she understands what he is offering and that she accepts it without debt. The sun drops fast this far north in this season. The light that remains when it touches the wall turns the ice there a particular shade of amber that is almost warm, almost gentle, a last performance of warmth before the dark takes full possession of the sky. Jon comes to stand beside Robert as the stars appear, and they look north together for a long time. And Jon says quietly that he used to stand at the top of the wall and try to see what was out there. Robert asks if he ever saw anything. Jon says not then, not with his eyes, but he felt it. The way you feel a storm before the air has changed, the way the body knows before the mind has formed the question. Robert is quiet for a moment. Then he says, that is what it is to carry something forward, to know the shape of a thing before the thing has shown itself. He does not elaborate. He does not need to. The first signal fire on the wall ignites while they are still standing there. Then the second, then the third, then the fourth in rapid succession, the chain of light running east along the top of the world like a sentence being spelled out in fire against the darkness, one word at a time, each word the same word, the only word that matters now. The word is danger. The word is always danger when it comes like that, spelled out in fire across the dark, each flame answering the last with the urgency of something that cannot wait for morning. Robert Baratheon looks at the chain of signal fires and feels for the first time in either of his lives that he is exactly where he is supposed to be. Not the throne room, not the feast hall. Here, on the edge of the known world, with cold air in his lungs and a hammer at his belt, and a boy beside him who is more than a boy, who has always been more than anyone around him understood. They move before the fourth fire has finished catching. There is no hesitation, no council convened, no letters drafted and sealed and sent. Robert gives the order, and the order becomes motion, and the motion becomes an army, and the army moves north into a darkness that has no interest in the politics of men. What follows in the frozen valley below the wall is not a battle in any clean or recordable sense. It is a collision between the world of the living and something that predates the very concept of living, something that does not grieve and does not tire and does not stop. The dead come in columns, in waves, in masses that have no edge the eye can find. They come with the silence of things that have forgotten what breath sounds like. And Robert Baratheon rides into them at the vanguard, his dragonglass-studded hammer rising and falling in a rhythm that is almost meditative, almost peaceful, the way a great craftsman looks peaceful when he is doing the one thing he was made to do. He kills them by the score. He kills them without counting. He kills them the way the ocean shapes a cliff, not with thought, but with absolute and patient force. Jon Snow moves beside him for much of it, and then Jon moves ahead, which is the right place for Jon to be. The White Walker lieutenant materializes from the cold like a sentence forming in a language older than the wall itself, and Jon faces it with Longclaw steady in his hand, and the look on his face that Robert has come to recognize as the look of a man who has already decided. The Valyrian steel connects. The walker shatters. Jon does not celebrate. He turns and looks for the next thing that needs doing, which is what leaders do, which is what Robert needed 20 years to learn, and Jon has known since childhood. Above all of it, the dragons paint the sky in gold and orange and the deep arterial red of something righteous and final. Daenerys commands them from the air with a precision that Robert, watching through the chaos of the vanguard, finds himself genuinely admiring. Entire columns of the dead are incinerated where they stand. The frozen valley fills with the smell of cold fire and silence spreading outward from the flames. It will be called the Baratheon Pass in every history written afterward. Robert would have found that embarrassing once. Now he understands that names matter. Names are how the living remember what the dead made possible. The Night King does not die easily. Nothing of that magnitude dies easily. He arrives at the center of things the way a truth arrives, not announced, but suddenly and undeniably present, and everything else reorganizes itself around him. Robert takes the wound in the final push, a White Walker blade catching him along the ribs in a glancing strike that nonetheless lays cold fire into the wound, a cold that moves inward with purpose, with something that feels almost like intention. He does not go down. He has never gone down easily, and he does not begin now. He stays on his feet long enough to do what he has always done best. He creates the opening. He absorbs what would stop a lesser man, and he keeps moving, and he forces the Night King to account for him, to focus on the breathing, roaring, still swinging king in front of him, which is the moment Jon Snow needs, and the moment Jon Snow takes. Longclaw finds the mark. The Night King does not shatter. He dissolves, slowly, like a word being unsaid, like a wound closing, like winter remembering that it was never meant to be permanent. The silence that follows is the most complete silence Robert Baratheon has ever heard. He is carried back to Winterfell. He recovers slowly over the length of a hard month, the cold working its way out of him by degrees, as though the wound is unwilling to release what it has claimed. But it does release. He is Robert Baratheon. He has defied the expected conclusion before. The abdication comes not as defeat, but as design, a formal ceremony at King's Landing, conducted with a deliberateness that surprises every lord who attends it, because they came expecting performance and find instead purpose. The new royal charter limits the crown's authority in ways that will take generations to fully understand and centuries to undo. Stannis accepts the succession with exactly the expression one would expect from Stannis: grave and slightly burdened, and already calculating the administrative implications. It is the right face for the right man for the right moment. Robert goes home to Storm's End. He hunts, he drinks, though less, and with more pleasure, and with the kind of relationship to pleasure that comes only when a man has stopped using it to drown something. He watches the world he helped to make, watches it through the years that follow with the quiet satisfaction of a craftsman who has set something in motion that will continue without him. He dies in his sleep at 63, which is older than anyone who knew the first version of him would have predicted. Outside the window of his chamber, the sea is doing what the sea has always done: indifferent, rhythmic, enormous, carrying the light of a full moon on its surface in a long, unbroken line that stretches from the horizon all the way to shore. They write many things about him afterward. They argue about which version of him was the true one. The young conqueror, the wasted king, the man reborn with cold clarity in his eyes. The historians disagree. The small folk, who remember only that the dead came and were stopped, have a simpler accounting. He was the king who remembered, and because he remembered, the world did not end. That is enough. That is, in the deepest sense, everything. And this brings us to the end of this alternate history. If you enjoyed exploring how events might have unfolded differently, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel. We dive into new stories from the world of Westeros every single day, imagining the choices, battles, alliances, and destinies that could have completely changed the fate of the Seven Kingdoms. I'd also love to hear your thoughts. What do you think would have happened next? Did this version of history end better than the original? Or would you have taken the story in a completely different direction? Leave your ideas in the comments, because many of the best future stories come directly from your suggestions. Thank you so much for watching and for spending your time with me. I'll see you tomorrow with another alternate history from Westeros. Until then, peace out.